Thank everybody for coming here to our second version of the JHU EP Tech Talks. These are the talks that are going to give you all the information that you need with the latest breaking technology. Building off the last one that we have a sort of a really exciting one tonight. Scott Stanchfield, who's going to, if you haven't read the bio as part of this and looked at what he's written online, you should go read it right now. I mean, just
well, not while I'm talking.
It's really good, and reading that alone, you'll be glad that you're here in terms of getting this ready. This talk is being brought to you by the Computer Science, Cybersecurity, and Information Systems Engineering programs here at EP. We are always looking for speakers. So if you have a talk that you think is like cutting edge in terms of what's going on with regard to technology, computer science, cybersecurity, anything that sounds sort of really cool and interesting, please feel free to contact me. I'm Tom Longstaff. I'm the chair of the three programs. Eleanor Klan, who's also here with us, is the program manager who also does sort of the day-to-day scheduling and everything else. So please get in touch with us. If you have any questions at all, of course, you can always get to us through email. We're going to continue to have questions for those of us that are here and can enter questions live. We'll take those as we go. If you were here, if you're watching at home and we're here, you could have got one of these really beautiful umbrellas that we have. So we have umbrellas and we've got all sorts of car shades. So next time, considering coming, be with us. We have pizza, we've got soft drinks, and we're a good group of people to interact with. So consider coming out next time and joining us here. Without further ado, let me announce Scott Stanchfield and turn it over to you.
So, hi, I'm Scott Stanchfield, and let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a developer since 1989, and I've been coding in C++, Java, and other languages. During that time period, I also took about 4 years, and I was a professional instructor, just flying around to different companies and teaching them Java. And it really kind of piqued my interest again for getting into teaching. But as you travel over 4 years and have to be out of town 3 out of 4 weeks, it gets to be a little heavy. So I decided to go back to development. And during that time, I kind of find a happy medium where my wonderful friends here at Johns Hopkins University got me in the door, and I've been teaching here for about 12 years, doing various classes, design patterns and Android programming in particular. Now here's my contact information. I have a personal website, javadude.com, and my email address is scott@javadude.com. It's like I'm not going to give my phone number because I don't want calls at 3 in the morning. And they told me when I was doing this slide for the online class that I should have some pictures to personalize it and show me in different areas of things that I like to do. So in particular, I have one here from I'm pointing over here, but we have the Adventure Park, which is where you can do zip lining and climbing in the trees. I love doing that. This is me swing dancing with my dad's girlfriend at one of my cousin's weddings. Roller coasters, love roller coasters. And this particular one, if you look at it really closely, you can see that the faces are just all over the place. It's just a crazy, crazy picture. I especially love this one over here on the end. This person looks like their head's going to explode. And then this is when I was Brother Berenstain Bear at Cedar Point. If you ever get a chance to dress up in a costume, best job ever. Lots and lots of fun. So anyway, on to something that actually means something. This is the Android ecosystem. This describes how your application interacts with the Android operating system. And you have 4 types of components you're going to provide in your application. You have activities, which these are your user interface components. It's basically individual screens that are going to interact with the user. You have services, which are background components that can go off to a website, fetch some data, maybe a database, collect that data, and send it back to your application. But that runs in the background. We have broadcast receivers, which are little components that wait in the shadows and just kind of listen for things to happen. Like, hey, the user just tapped on an NFC tag. Or Google Cloud Messaging sent you a message that says, you know, we now have some information for you. And then we have content providers, which are front ends to data. It could be a database, it could be a file system, it could be going over the network, or it could be generating data on the fly. All of these components are glued together using these things called intents. And that's really where we're going to spend our time in the first part of this talk. An intent is your way of describing something that you want to do. You're not explicitly saying, talk to another component. You're saying, I would like to do something, and the system decides how to send that to different components that have been registered. Each of your activities may be registered to receive intents. So when a receiver sends an intent, or a service sends an intent, or another activity sends an intent, the OS may say, hey, activity, Go ahead and do something. But it's up to the OS to figure out which one to actually call at that point. There are two types of intents. First of all, explicit intents. These are ones where you say, I want to go to activity X. And this is your way of explicitly navigating. Those aren't terribly interesting. We get into the interesting ones when we talk about implicit intents, which is where you describe logically what you want to do and the OS figures it out. You describe that using a string called an action that says I want to view something, I want to edit something, I want to make a call, I want to scan or play something. You give it a category, which gives you a group of things you might want to interact with. MIME type, which could be I want to work on an image or a piece of HTML or a piece of text. And then a URL or URI that describes the thing you actually want to edit. When you plug these in, the system's going to try to match them up using something called intent filters behind the scenes. For an explicit intent, it's really easy to start one of these guys up. You just say new intent, passing in the current application context, and then which activity you want to target. In this particular case, we're saying run some activity inside the current application. We could choose a different application, but normally you keep it within your own application. We're going to attach a little data here. It could be any name value pair you want. The value can be a primitive, it can be a serializable, or in Android they have something called parcelable that you can use. And then we just say start activity. We're going to take this information, pass it to start activity. The system's going to look for a matching activity and run it. In this case, the only possible matching activity is some activity. When you have an implicit intent, it's a little more generic. You describe logically what you want to do. I'm going to edit something. We're going to grab a URI to describe that something, and then plug that data into the intent. So we're going to say, here's the thing I want to edit. Could be a web page, could be an image. And then here's the MIME type of that guy. When we call start activity, the OS is now going to go search for something that can meet this intent. We describe those using intent filters. And each application can register these intent filters in their manifest, which is a little XML file. The action describes, when you describe an action in an intent filter, the action you can have multiple actions in an intent filter. In order for the thing to match, you have one action in your intent, and the intent filter can have several of these actions. One of them must match to be considered a matching intent. I just tripped all over myself on that one. But anyway, on we go. The category, if you have categories in the intent filter, then every single one of them must match every single one in the actual intent. And then finally, if you specify data in your intent, you must have data in your intent filter. So here's an example of an intent filter. And when I created this slide, this is one of those examples of you really don't want to edit your slides 10 minutes before your presentation because you put in spaces and the yellow box doesn't get moved automatically. So this yellow box should actually be around the MIME type down at the bottom because that's the interesting part. This intent filter says watch for people who ask to edit images. And if we have somebody asking to edit an image, we can handle it. This intent filter is saying I want to edit anything that's listed as having a URL of http://www.javadude.com. Now that might be more interesting if you were trying to view a web page, and then your application can suck in all the javadude.com web pages where everything else would just go to the default browser. Finally, this one combines them, where I'm going to say anything that's labeled with http://www.javadude.com and is an image. Those are the things I want to edit. I'm going to capture those and edit in my application. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap over to Eclipse here, and we'll run a couple of examples. So I'm going to create a little Android application here. I'm going to call it Intents. And we'll set this guy up here with just all the normal defaults. And I'm going to take a real quick peek through this Android code just so you can kind of see what happens inside a project to start with. When this project got generated, he created this MainActivity.java. How's that font size? Is that okay for everyone? I don't want anyone to have to squint. So in this main activity, this is the Java code that represents this single view on the screen. In this case, it's the main view that we're dealing with. And what he's going to do, he has this little onCreate method, which is called by the OS when the application's starting up. And then onCreate is just going to say, I want to load up a layout, so that this layout will be what's displayed on the screen. And the layout's an XML file. I'll show it to you in a minute. Create Options menu is going to say, hey, I want to put a little menu up at the top called the action bar. Hey, come on in. Join the crowd. We're we're going to create the main menu from the little XML file. And then this guy down here is going to say, when something in that menu is selected, let's take a look at what it was. In this case, action settings is one that's defined there, and handle it. Now, I'm not actually doing anything in this because it's just skeleton code for right now, but we'll add a few things here later. And here's what the layout looks like. They have a nice little layout editor here, and you'll see that this one's really simple, just has hello world inside of it. But behind the scenes, this is backed by an XML file. It looks like this. We're describing a layout, and we have a text view inside that layout. The text view just says, put some text on the screen. Surprise! So there we have a simple little example to start with. What I want to do is I want to tweak this so that we're going to read the pictures directory off of my phone and then just display a list of pictures. When we have that list of pictures, I'm going to tap on one, and we'll go off and edit it. And then we can see how we can go to different types of editors from there. So to start with, bless you. To start with, no need to apologize, it happens. We're going to say we have a list view here, and I'm going to put in a couple little parameters here. I don't like fading scroll bars. A lot of things on phones nowadays, they have a little scroll bar that if you start moving, the scroll bar appears, and then it fades away. And the thing I don't like about that is that when you look at that list, you have no idea it's scrollable. I mean, sometimes things will line up just perfectly, and you won't know it's scrollable because there's no scroll bar there until the user starts moving. Oh, I can scroll that. So I don't like fading scroll bars at all. So now the other thing, scroll bar style. I'm going to go with outside inset. I'm not going to describe what that means. It just makes a little gutter, essentially, for the scroll bar. So there's my list view. That's going to be the only component I care about inside here. Now in my main activity, I'm going to come in here and say, I want to go find that list view. I didn't give it an ID, did I? Let me give it an ID so I can actually use it. And then over here I can say, grab that list view. Now I realize for those of you who have not done Android programming, this is going to be moving very, very quickly. Some of these details like this, I'm not really intending to go over in here because normally this takes several weeks to get to this point when I'm teaching it. But what I want to do is get to the intent part. So I'm going to set this up, let you see what it actually generates. So you get a little bit of an idea of what it looks like to code with Android. But I'm not going to go into a lot of the details on how this works. So now I've got my list view. Let me get a list of files in the picture directory. So this is going to look on the SD card to try to read pictures off of it. Now before I forget, if you want to look on the SD card, you got to specify permission that says you want to look on the SD card. This actually, when I was doing setting up this demonstration, I sat here like banging my head on the desk like, why isn't this working? Why am I not getting a list of anything? And of course I forgot to specify the permission that says I need to go and get the files off the SD card.
Do you do that permission through the phone? Does the phone have to allow the application to do it?
So actually grab the microphone there.
Do you have to, through the phone settings, allow the application to reach down and grab the photos?
Okay, so what you have to do, there's two things. One, you have to specify that you want the permission. So the first thing we do is go to the manifest, and we're going to say, I want to add in a uses permission for read external storage. So this is your way of the application saying, I need that permission. Now each permission has some characteristics to it. One of the characteristics is how dangerous this is for the user. And it might just be marked as a, hey, it's perfectly safe operation, such as if you're accessing the sensors on the device, which we just talked about a little bit ago, actually may become a dangerous permission at some point. But some things like, I want to read your personal data on your SD card, is one that we want to ask the user about. And so that's flagged as dangerous. Excuse me. And what that means is that when the application's installed, it's going to pop up for the user and say, hey, I'm asking for these permissions. Is that OK with you? The problem you get is that's a great way to do it, except users have this habit of, OK, 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 OK. And that, they end up just not seeing that that's there. So we warn them about it. But it's up to the user to actually pay attention to the message. And unfortunately, most users on the phones, they don't pay close enough attention to that. It's like watching my son using Windows, and it gets the dialogue saying, do you want to let this web page install this random application that it's trying to take over your computer? He's like, yeah, get out of my face. I want to play the game. So yeah, it's there. It'll ask the user, but it's not really a foolproof way of stopping. Okay, so we just added that permission to the manifest. Now, when I'm running in debug mode, it's not going to pop up and ask me that, because I'm assuming that I'm the developer, I'm running it, I would accept my own permissions. But if I put this on the Google Play Store, then it's going to actually ask the users who download it, hey, do you really want to allow this? Okay, so now we have that. I'm going to get my directory here. And then I'm going to create a little adapter here. And let's see, whoops, there we go, layout dot simple list item 1 will be good. And pass in the data I want, which is going to be directory dot list files. So what this line does for me, and I'll just break it up so it's actually a little more visible, is this is going to be the data provider for the list view. So it's my model, if you're familiar with Model View Controller. He's going to fetch some data, push it into the list view so we can display it on the screen. Now we're going to use array adapter, which is just a really simple adapter that just says call to string on each of the things in the array, and use that as the display on the screen. You can get much more advanced and create your own adapters that let you design what a given row looks like. But we're just going to use a nice simple array adapter here. I'm using a one-line list item that Android provides, so it'll just put the text in that list. And then here's the files that I want to display on the screen. So exciting so far. Let's just take a look and see if what I have so far works. So I'm going to say run as Android application. Swap over to my phone here. And this is actually a copy of my phone running on the screen here. I'm using a little program called MobiZen, which is just mirroring the screen image. OK, so let's see. The question I have right now is there anything in my pictures directory? Because there was before. I'm just hoping it didn't get deleted somehow. Let's see if there's anything going on in here that looks bad. Oh, you know what I did? I forgot to connect the adapter to the list view. So I'm going to say list view, set adapter, and let's try running that again. This should fix it. Because I'm pretty sure I have pictures in there because I tried this before. There we go. So now we're just getting a list of the files, just the URIs of those files on there. Not terribly exciting so far. Now I'm just going to add in a little code here that says when I click on one, I want to start an image editor. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a really simple image editor that's just going to view the image. It's not really going to edit it. So I'm going to come in here and say, I'll just make a copy of that activity. And let's create a layout for him. And we're going to say activity edit. And all I'm going to do on this guy is put in an image view. Kind of like that. And we'll go to my edit activity. And let's do a find for the image view. Oops. And let me actually, how do I want to do this? I'm going to have data coming into this guy through the intent. I'm going to pull the URI out of it and actually drop it in that image view. So this actually should be pretty simple. We'll say, get the intent that caused me to be invoked. So the operating system is going to hand that data to me. And I'm going to say, get data, which is that URI. And there's my URI. And then I can say image view dot set image URI to that. And that should display it. Now, once again, on this guy, I need a permission. Well, it's like the same application, but I need a permission to read that directory now. So I pass in the URI. I want to read it to put it inside of that image. So let's go to my manifest. And, oh, that was a read. Never mind. I already got it. So this one, I believe, is going to do everything we need there. We're going to grab the URI. Boom. We're all good. Now, what we need to do is register this activity with the operating system. We do that by declaring it in the manifest. Hello, manifest. There we go. And, oops, I took one too many lines, I think, there. So I'm going to call this the edit activity. This is my new activity. I think somebody is trying to get in, or they... Ah, oh, I scared somebody off already? Okay, so for the action on this one, let's use the edit action on that intent. So we're going to try to capture whenever somebody says, I want to edit an image. And then just because of the way that implicit intents work, I have to specify that default category. So this is going to say I want to edit something. Now I want to be a little more specific on what it is. I don't want to be the receipt of every edit request in the world, like edit a text file, edit an image, edit HTML. I want to say only edit images. So I'm going to add in here a data with MIME type of image star, just like that. So he's nice and simple. So this should capture anybody who gives an implicit intent saying I want to edit an image. And let's go back to the main activity. And let's deal with clicking on those images, or clicking on the things in the list. So I'm going to say list view. Woohoo, hello. Set on item click listener. And what I'm going to do when an item in the list is clicked, I'm going to want to start a new intent, passing in a URI for that image. That's going to be whatever was in that row. And passing in the MIME type is image / whatever the image type is. And then the action is going to be edit. So I'm going to create a new intent. I'm going to pass in intent.actionEdit. And then I'm going to attach the data to it. So set data and type. We need the URI, which I'll grab in a second, and the MIME type. Actually, I'll call this image / I'm actually not sure what type of image it is in there. Those are all JPEGs. I'll just use JPEG then. I could use star if I wanted to there. It would still match. Now to get that URI, I need to find out what was tapped in the list. Well, I've been given the position. So I can say adapter.get item at that position. And we'll make him final just so I can get to him. And then there we go. We're going to grab a file from that. So whatever is at that position, we're going to grab it. And then I'm just going to pass in that URI there. Now, if you're used to the Java URI class, the all uppercase URI, this is a little bit different. The Android version is capital U and then lowercase ri. So instead of saying file.toURI, I've got to go through the URI class to grab it. So this adds the data. Let's start our activity. And hopefully, if this works, we should see when you tap on something, it should go off to my little image editor, which should just display it on the screen. So let's try running it. So here's my list. I'm going to tap on one of these guys, like right there. Now it's coming up with this little action box here. It's saying, well, which app do you want to use for this? And this is happening because I don't have a default set. And edit for images is associated with these three applications. You're going to see this first one up here is associated with mine that I just created, right? These other two are photo editors that actually come on this Android device with this version of the operating system. I'm going to select mine there and say just once. I don't want to set it as the default. I'm just going to say, for now, I want to use my one. And poof, there we go. We have an image up there on the screen. Exciting, huh? This is, by the way, is at IKEA, and this is how you enjoy IKEA. My kids love to go there, and we take crazy pictures all the time there. So, boom, that worked. I now have my activity is handling image edits for this. And if some other application, somebody said, hey, I want to edit an image, mine would come up as an option there. And they could choose mine as the default if they wanted to. Now, the other thing they can do is I could go off to one of the editors that is in Android, and poof. Now, this gives me a little bit more flexibility here. I can do things like tweak it with these crazy filters, and now I feel like I'm doing, what is that Instagram site thing there. But I have my normal pictures, and I can edit them through whichever one I want. If I want to make it the default, I can come in here and say, I want to always use my editor. And now when I come back the next time, boom, it just comes up and shows me whatever the other pictures are that are in there. Okay, works just fine. So I need to fix that because I don't want to use my editor for all images. So I'm going to go off to my settings here. And I'm going to go to Apps. And there he is. And when I look at the app definition for this guy, down at the bottom, you'll see that there's this Launch by Default section right here. And what Launch by Default is going to do is treat this as the default application. I can just hit Clear Defaults here. Boom. Now there's no default set. If I go back and run this again, it's back into asking me mode again. Make sense? Now, this is one way that I can provide a default editor for something, but then later on maybe have a completely separate application, which is the enhanced editor. And so if I were to create a separate application here, finish, I can copy that edit over from the first one. So I'm going to come in here. Let's take all of his code and just copy it into the main for this guy. This mouse is just not liking double clicks for some reason. And that's going to be activity main. So let me copy his layout over. And let's tweak the layout a little bit so that we can actually see that it's something different. Let's add in a little text field at the top of this guy. And we'll get sizing on there as well. Let's call this a text view. I'm not going to need an ID on this one. And don't need this. Let's just give him a text equals blah. And then this one should work just fine. So I just want to do this just so I can see that this looks different from that other one and make sure we're not calling the other one that existed already. And let's see, what is he not liking up here? I did not end my layout here, or did I? Oh, I needed orientation, vertical, and I need to actually close that off. There, now he's happy. And let's take a look at this guy, make him be activity main. And I think this should work. I just need to register the intent filter on him. Oops. That's not the right one, it's this one here. I gotta turn off this folding mode. I don't like folding. Okay, and then up to here. I'm gonna set it up so that his intent filter is just going to catch images. Now, in this particular application, now I no longer have one that says main and launcher, which means that this application you cannot launch by going to the application finder. So he's only here to provide a service. That's going to be editing images. So I can come in here, and I'm going to say run as Android application. And down here in the console, oops, oh, here we go. What it's going to say is this launch will only sync the application package because there's no launcher activity. So he's just telling me I've just copied it to the device. This would be similar as if you went to the store and then downloaded this enhanced editor. Although it's very likely that a store application would have a separate entry point where you can just say edit. Okay, so now I've got him in there. Oh, here we go with the texts. Okay, so now I got him running. Let's go back to my intents application and run him. And what do you think we're going to see when I tap on one of these? Any ideas? How many choices do you think I'm going to have when I tap? 4. Right, I'll have the 3 that we saw before plus this new one. So I tap on one of these, I now have 4. So you see my original edit, which was part of this application, and now enhanced editor, which is that new application I just did there. So this gives you a very pluggable system. And we can use this for things like alternate keyboards, alternate browsers, alternate editors, alternate viewers, all sorts of different things you can plug in. And if you start thinking about your application more modularly this way, then you don't have to provide the be-all, end-all functionality for every part of your app. If you're flexible, other people can enhance your app. Or you can leverage other applications that already exist. Like one of the common ones that I do whenever I'm doing stuff at APL is I leverage this little barcode scanner here. Which, do I have a barcode here? Yeah, let's see if it's going to work. And so I can scan a barcode. Nah, he's probably too shiny. Well, if I had a proper barcode that I could scan, ooh, bottle of water. There we go. We can scan that. So I leverage this barcode reader who has one of his activities exposed using an implicit intent. And so what I can do is, as long as this barcode reader is installed, I can jump to it, and if I wanted to swap it out for a different barcode reader, I could. So very nice support for things like that. So any questions on any of that? The idea of intents makes sense there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
First, I want to know, are these concepts applicable to the iOS and iPhones?
Okay, so as far as the iOS and iPhones, honestly, I do not know. As far as I know, they don't behave this way. And I know that iOS, they just changed things up so you can now have replaceable keyboards, but I'm not sure how they're doing that, if it's very explicit or if they made it more dynamic like this. But as far as I know, they don't, but I really don't know iOS programming, so I can't speak to that. Okay. Did anyone else in here happen to know that? No? Okay. Other question?
Yeah. So you were saying you were projecting your phone's screen on your, so how does that work? And then when you compiled the code, did it install the application? It didn't.
Okay, so 2 questions here. The first is, how I'm getting the screen to be mirrored. In this case, I'm using an application called MobiZen that has a component running on the phone. And he takes a look at the images on the phone every half second or so. He copies the screen and blasts it over USB and then displays it. There's other apps that do something similar, but this one's actually the best performing one that I've seen. So you can just, as I swipe through the phone, you can see it's actually performing really well here. Almost a one-to-one. There's a really slight delay, but it's very unnoticeable. There are other apps to do that. If you don't want to display it on a PC, if you're looking to display it on a TV, you can get adapters to go to HDMI very easily, and that'll send it up there. And then there's also some phones, not all of them, but some phones support Miracast, which is a little protocol that just goes over something. It's basically a wireless protocol. And you can get a little dongle you can stick in the HDMI port on the TV, and it displays it. You can also use Chromecast, which is another one that it's a little bit more limited. Miracast will just completely mirror the screen. Chromecast basically says, hey, device on the TV, please play this thing. And so the thing on the TV actually has the apps running on it that go off and fetch it. So you, like this little Netflix app on the Chromecast that sucks content down. So it's a little bit different approach there. The advantage to the Chromecast is then you don't have to be running things through your phone. The phone is a, here, go do that. It's kind of your remote control. But with Miracast, you're running on the phone and then cloning as display. So this is a little closer to what Miracast would be like.
And it's called
MobiZen, M-O-B-I-Z-E-N. And it's great for demonstrations like this. This is the best one I've found for it. And it's a completely free application. You do have to register and have to be online in order to make the initial connection. But once you made the initial connection, you can actually disconnect from the internet. Okay, any other questions before I move on there? Anyone?
So aside from the MIME types that you had with the images, are the other sensors on the phone available as MIME types that you can just do the same sort of thing with intents?
No, not really. The difference there is with the sensors on the device, those are all managed by some services. So what you would do is you would connect to that service and attach a listener saying, hey, I'm interested in knowing when your values change. Because you're not really making a request. If you made a request of an intent, you wouldn't get a good enough performance out of it because it has to marshal that, send it over to a different service. The thing that's nice about the way they have it handled now is that everything's push from the sensors. Whereas with an intent, you're basically sending some data to somebody. I think one of the best ways to describe an intent is if you think of kind of like a publish-subscribe situation where you're saying, you know, I want to hear these things, please notify me when they get there. And that's kind of what happens when you register things. Anybody who sends that intent is sending a message. The people who handle the intents are registered and they receive them. They're the subscribers. So it's similar to that type of situation. And the filters are pretty flexible in that, but it's anything that you want to set up a listener. You can set up a broadcast receiver to grab these. And the broadcast receiver is something that doesn't really run in the foreground. So it doesn't pop up a user interface. It just sits there kind of waiting. And then when you send your intent out, if the broadcast receiver wants to handle it, it can grab it and then handle it. And I've used that for doing things like catching SMS coming in. So we used a couple phones to say if somebody's communicating between two phones over SMS, we might have one application that's using a specially encoded SMS to send data. You know, if we're in a country where they don't have 3G connections, or they might have just normal text messages, so we can send little bits of information back and forth. But they did put a security thing in for that, where you can't have the broadcast receiver start until at least one activity in that application has been made visible. This prevents applications from accidentally being sideloaded, and then somebody's put something in the background that's just listening to everything you do, which is a bit of a concern. You don't want that to happen. Okay. So another thing that's happening with intents is they're trying to push this idea to the web. So they're trying to set things up so that you can be running in a browser like Chrome, and when you run some web pages, on that page it might have some JavaScript, and the JavaScript might say, I want to do X, and so he describes it as an intent. And then whatever you have registered in your browser, you can have those particular services be triggered. So maybe you like to do an image editor from foo.com. You can register in your browser, hey, I've got foo.com as my image editor. And then next time you're in a page, you click on that edit image, it just goes to foo.com and does that. It might also just bring code down and implement it and just execute it in your current session as well. That's something they're trying to do. They kind of gave up on it about 2 years ago. There were some real big issues. I think they bit off a little too much at one time there. Because if you think about it, this thing can spiral out of control pretty quickly. They're just starting to spin back up again. There's somebody who created a spec called Web Wishes. Originally they called this Web Intents. And Web Wishes are kind of a similar concept. They're trying to generify it a little bit and be very, very narrow on the scope. And so they're trying to look at that as a starting point and kind of build out again. So I suspect in 2 years they'll throw it away again. But we'll see how it goes. Okay, so any other questions on intents? So, but this is a style of programming that I think even if in your own web server, you can do something kind of similar to that. It gives you a little bit more ways, different ways of thinking about separation of concerns. And so, you might not do it using this exact structure, but if you still think about that same kind of, instead of calling X, you describe what you want to do and register X in your own little container, then you can have a lot more flexible application. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was fragments. So I'm going to come over here, and we've seen these activities where you have these separate screens. And the problem with an activity is when you go to a bigger screen, like if you're using a tablet, some of these activities have really minimal information on them, and it just looks sparse. It just looks bad. And if you have a list of things that you click on, and then you get the editor displayed over here for it, it might make sense to just put them side by side on a bigger screen, right? So you have the list here, and then the details here. When you tap on this, it just changes this instead of going over to another intent. This also speeds up navigation, because then you can go click, click, click to just see 3 different ones, as opposed to click, back, click, back, click, back, click, back type thing. Make sense? So the idea with fragments is that instead of having all the logic in the activity itself, you have the logic in the actual, you have the logic in a separate component called a fragment. And you embed the fragments together in the XML. So the fragment manages the data, the activities manage the navigation. And that kind of looks this way. So we start off with our activities communicating with each other. And the example that I was going to show you has 3 activities talking to a database. And each of those activities is directly talking to the database, and then just navigating back and forth using in start activity, just switching back and forth with intents. They use these XML files to describe their layout. When we switch over to a fragment situation, what we're going to do is tease out the actual logic inside these activities into some fragment classes. And once we have those fragment classes, the activities will ask them to do the data management and just throw some data at them. Those guys can go and get the data from the database directly. And what's nice about this now is that each of those has their own little XML chunk to say, here's what I want to display on the screen. Now we have some XML here that we're going to do something a little different with. I'm going to define an XML that's landscape-oriented for my list activity. All of these other ones are defaults, so they'll be used in portrait mode. But by having this alternate layout here, I can set it up so that I have multiple fragments inside that same XML. They use the database as well. And if I want to, I could actually throw in a third activity or a third fragment inside of this XML and just swap between these two back and forth. So I just change what's being displayed on the screen. Navigation happens up at the activity level. So we'll say when something happens, navigate. Data management happens in the fragment level. So let's take a look at a little example here. And what this guy does, he lets me add an item to my to-do list. And then I can say, OK, and I can add another item here. Drain oil. And other things like that. And then you can click on these guys. It goes to display. If you're in display, you can say edit it. It comes back here. You can edit it. Ooh, exciting application, isn't it? OK. But it's a fairly simple little application. And what I've got in there right now is a display activity, an edit activity, and a main activity. The main activity, we're using a database here to be able to push the data in and out of the list. I'm not going to go through any of that detail. But the thing that I'm interested in here is if I push new on the action bar, I'm going to create an intent. And in this case, I'm using an explicit intent because I want to definitely stay inside my application. For security purposes, I don't want to go out to edit this data. I'm going to push in the ID of the thing I want. -1 means a new one. And then start the activity. Similarly, if an item is clicked, I'm going to call the display activity, passing in the clicked on ID. My edit activity is just going to set up his user interface. I'm going to grab the fields. And then when the user actually gets interaction, that's what onResume is called, I'm going to look up the item ID and then go and get the data for it. And then I put that data on the screen. And the display is almost identical to that, except instead of dealing with editable fields, I'm dealing with read-only fields. Now, in order to make these work as a fragmented system, what I'm going to do is make a copy of each of these. Kind of like that. And in the fragments, I'm going to try to set it up so that all I worry about is data management. I don't worry about navigation. And in the activities, all I worry about is navigation and not data management. So what I want to have it do is set up the activity and the fragment. And the fragment is going to have a little listener in it. The activity is going to register as a listener on there. And when the data in the fragment changes, it's going to go back and notify the activity. And that's going to tell the activity when navigation type things happen. So I've saved my data, I canceled my data, and then the activity figures out how to navigate. So let me show a real quick example of part of that. And in my display fragment, I have to create that interface. And we'll call it listener. And we're going to say from display, I want to edit something. And there's the ID of it. So inside this fragment, I need to change the way things work here a little bit. Hope that's the wrong one. Oh, I didn't change to a fragment, that's why. And then I can say inside here, inflator.inflate. I'm trying to make a call in my head right now whether I should just go ahead and try to download that. Let me try that real quick, because there's not going to be time to really get you to a point to actually see something. And so he is under that DSIM directory.
And action.
Yes. So we're going to import him. From there. It works so fast when it works. OK, so let me just show you what this stuff looks like now. So this is a slightly simpler example. This one just has edit in it. It doesn't actually have a display side to it. But what I did is I created 2 edit fragments for the example in the class. And it's just going to toggle between the 2 in that secondary view. So what we have is in our main fragment, let's start with the main activity. So the main activity that used to have this to-do list inside of it, now all we have is the setup of the user interface, which is in onCreate. And in onCreate, I go and grab the sub-fragments. So the list fragment, the edit fragment, and then that alternate edit fragment. And then I have this little variable I'm setting up saying, we have multiple fragments. So just checking to see, are there multiple in my layout? And it's only going to happen in the landscape layout, not the portrait layout. So if I have multiple fragments, I'm going to listen to each of those guys for when the user interacts with them. So when the user says, I'm done, or I'm canceling, I'm going to decide what that navigation means. So when the user says I'm done on the edit, I'm going to just toggle the edit fragment. So I'm swapping it. And normally I'd toggle the display and the edit. So you'd switch back and forth between those modes. But just for this demonstration in class, I used 2 edits because I wanted them to do the display themselves. And then the main fragment, I'm going to listen to the list. And I'm going to say when we're creating a new item. So when they push that little create button on the toolbar, what do I want to do navigation-wise? Well, if we have multiple fragments on the screen, all I'm going to do is go to that little editor and say, edit this guy. If we don't have multiple fragments on the screen, I need to switch activities because I only have one available. So then I'm going to do the normal intent stuff to switch back and forth. Make sense? And then if an item in the list is selected, again, I'm going to do the same type of thing. If I have multiple fragments, I'm going to use that other fragment and just stick the data in him. Otherwise, I'm going to create an intent and go off to the other activity. Okay. So that's what the main guy does. And then the main fragment the little listener that I was starting to define up there has on create and on item selected. I let the activity set the listener so he can listen to us. And then set up my user interface the same way as before. The only difference is when something's clicked, talk to the listener. So I'm sending things back to the activity. And the activity can make the navigation decision. And when the user says new, again, talk back to the activity. And the nice thing about this is I don't know that that's an activity. It could be anybody listening to me. All I'm doing is notifying whoever that is that I've done something interesting, and then they should deal with navigation. And then similar for the other guys here where we have the edit activity. All he's going to do is find the fragment and set up a listener. When the user says I'm done, go ahead and put in the item ID to send back to the caller to say, everything's done, I'm good. If it was canceled, I'm just going to say, I'm out of here. Call finish, which stops the current activity and pops it off the stack. It's similar to hitting the back button on the Android device. And the other edit one's exactly the same as that. The only difference is they're on the layout, it says something different at the top. I think I put PLA on that one as well. So let me run this one so you can see what he looks like. OK, good, he's in portrait. Right now I'm starting in portrait mode. OK, and this is a little by the way, if you're ever doing a phone interface, never have text that small. I don't know what I did when I designed this the first time, but that's really hard to tap on with a finger. Fortunately, I'm using a mouse right here. But if I tap on it, I come to my edit screen. I can edit it, save him. This happens to be using the same database as the other one that I was working with. And so we have the edit capability. We can say create a new one, create him, Life's Peachy. So that's how that works. Now let's show you what happens when I rotate the screen. Boom. Now what you're seeing here is two fragments. So here is my main fragment, the one that has a list in it, and here's my edit fragment. And so if I click on one of these guys, it's going to display it in the edit fragment there. And this is a really nice way to take up extra space on the screen and not have the interface look too sparse. Because if I just had the list would stretch across the whole screen. It would look kind of out of place, right? And it's just a huge waste of space, and it makes the user do more navigation than they need to. And then if I hit the OK button here, I have it set up to toggle. So it's toggling this to the other fragment. Now normally, again, I do that from display and edit to toggle them back and forth. But this is now set up a situation where the main activity is handling both of these guys and just passing data back and forth. And the fragments don't know each other exist, which is a real advantage here. Because this guy just says, let the user click and tell the listener. This guy just says, let the user edit and tell the listener. And then the activity is coordinating between them, whether they're on the same screen or whether they're on different screens. Does that make sense? So that's the idea of fragments. They're a really cool little way of separating out user interfaces. And if you take this type of approach on thinking about your user interfaces, whether you're doing a graphical user interface or a web user interface, and if you think about sub-interfaces being just managing your data, and then those sub-interfaces communicate back to somebody who's managing the data going back and forth, it's going to really simplify your applications. Rather than thinking of this as one user interface and having to manage all of it together, you can manage them as separate chunks, and then you get a lot of good reuse out of them too. Okay, so let's see, was there anything else in there? The difference in the layouts. Here's what the main activity looks like when I'm setting up in portrait mode. That's in the layout directory. I define this other layout-land directory. And what Android does, it has little extensions on these. You'll see things like drawable HDPI, drawable LDPI, MDPI, and so on. These are different versions of things to draw on the screen, like icons, for different screen densities. So low, medium, high density screens. This is a different version of a layout for landscape orientation. So when I rotate to landscape, it loads this guy. When I rotate back to portrait mode, it loads the one from the normal layout directory. And so that's the way that Android lets you do things like internationalization. You can put on a suffix on there that has your language and your country if you want. and it'll choose different layouts for that or different string sets for that. So you can internationalize, you can change based on screen characteristics, size of screens, orientations of screens. And this guy ends up having a layout with 3 fragments in it. And then I'm toggling between these 2 fragments using a wonderful little guy here called the Fragment Transaction inside my support Fragment Manager. And so the Fragment Manager says show one, hide the other, or show the other and hide the one. And I commit the transaction and it swaps the 2. And so this lets you manage what you see on the screen a little bit more nicely. Now on the side, I'm working on a framework that's going to help manage this a little bit more cleanly. So instead of having to determine, do I have 2 fragments or not, I want to get it so that there's one activity and we just swap fragments in and out regardless if there's multiple fragments on the screen. So it'll figure out when to do multiple fragments, it'll figure out when to do one fragment, and not have to worry about multiple activities. That would simplify things quite a bit here. But I'm in kind of that initial researchy state on it. So, whew, there we go. We actually got that. It's a little bit more fun when I actually convert the code, but at least I was able to show you the code there, right? Any other questions? Yes?
I have a more conceptual one.
Mm-hmm.
So this has to do with layouts. So I guess the premise is I have an app that I don't want it when it I don't want the layout to change when it becomes a tablet or like a phone.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I have it set up right now is I have layout and I have layout dash large. So that when it's a tablet, it will point to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is it's very inefficient because I have to manually go in and set all the DPs and make sure my small one looks good and then make sure my large one looks good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really a waste of my time. So, but I looked online and people were like, that's the way to do it, because I try to look for things where people say, can we use a percentage? You know, when we're doing the layouts, can we make it so that it says margin top is a percentage of the whole screen? Because that would make a lot more sense. Then it will always,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But apparently people say you don't do that. Is that true?
Yeah, well, what you want to do, the first thing that you want to do is you always want to use DP instead of pixel specifications. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to say that I want to have a certain border around things, what you want to do is think in terms of actual size of things that there's going to appear. If I have a big screen versus a small screen here, okay, so there's one there. So let's say you have a small screen, you have a bigger screen, and maybe you have one that's a really, really big screen. Now he's off again. There we go. If you think about how something's going to appear for the user, like if you want them to have a target to hit their finger on, typically you want that to be 48 density-independent pixels, DPI, across and down. And a DPI is equal to 1 pixel on a screen that's 160 dots per inch. Wow, I'm just completely losing this here. There must be like a region around this guy. Can I move him away? No. A DPI is equal to 1 pixel on a 160 dot per inch screen. So if you're on a screen that's a lot higher density, you're going to need to have your image be a lot bigger to appear the same size as one on a lower density screen. And so if you think about doing all your sizings like your margins and thinking about it as I want a half an inch, so I want 80 DPs. I'm sorry, these should be DIP. DIP, density independent pixel, versus dots per inch. And if you think of this as being 80 DIPs, so density independent, then on a screen that is 160 dots per inch, it's going to actually be 80 pixels. If you're thinking about a screen that is 360 dots per inch, then that same thing is going to end up being 160 pixels on the screen. So it's going to actually scale itself based on how many dots it has to fill.
Get your same half an inch.
Yep, it'll still look like a half an inch on both devices. And that's critical. That's the first thing to do. So if you're dealing with spacing, like things like margins and things, that helps there. If you are doing things like images, they have those directories that say drawable HDPI, MDPI, XHDPI, LDPI, and so on. So these are for different types of screen resolutions: high density, medium, extra high, and low. And There's two ways you can approach it. You can go for the highest density and get a really big picture. So you basically say, here's how big I want it to be on a high density screen. And then let the system scale it down for you on lower density screens. It won't be quite as clean, but it would be better than if you chose low density and had it scale up, or medium and had it scale up. So if you only want to do one image, put it in the highest density you can get. If you want to do multiple, there are, if you look for Android Resizer, there's a couple tools out there where you pass an image in and it creates all the scaled versions of it for you. So it can do some nice scaling. That's especially effective if you have a vector image, because in the vector image you can render it at multiple places. Your best bet is if you make your images in something like Illustrator and have it render at all those different densities, and then it looks nice. But yeah, the big key is really use DIPs everywhere. Never ever use pixels.
That's weird. Yeah, because like I use DPs everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is because every time I go online, people use DPs. I don't see people using DIPs. You know?
Well, DP and DIP is the same thing.
Oh,
it's just a different wording for it.
Yes, I mean, yeah. So I guess like on a small screen, I want one of my buttons to be say like 10% of the screen. Then,
Oh, okay. So you want percentages?
Yeah. So
okay.
And then on a big screen, of course, if I use DP, it's going to end up too small on a big screen.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want is I want to say when it's on a big screen, I want the program to programmatically make it 10% of the big screen,
mm-hmm.
but I haven't been able to figure out how to do that.
Okay.
It's hard-coded in.
Yeah, the easiest way to do that is if you're using a linear layout. I'm going to have to see if I can figure out what's wrong with that guy. If you're using a linear layout, I had one here someplace. Here we go. Inside your layout, like in this one, this is a horizontal layout. If I wanted something to be 10% of the screen, what I do is I first of all say, give him 0 DPs as his width. So start him off as nothing. And then I'm going to make his weight be 1/10 of the total weight of everybody here. So you see in this example here, I have 3 guys who each have a weight of 1. And so in this particular example, each of them is going to take up 1/3 of the screen. So if I wanted to have this guy be 10% and these guys be the remaining 90, I could maybe make these be 45, 45, and 10, kind of like that. And then that sets up a weighting between them. So you can use something like that. That'll help out.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the best you can do on percentages there, unless you define your own custom layout. And then you can do some interesting things like, well, you could define a custom view for your button or a custom button subclass that defines his intrinsic width and height as functions where you just say, hey, what's my incoming size, what's my maximum sizes, set my size to be 10% of it. So you can do that. Typically, it's better to do it in a layout here so that it varies based on the device characteristics.
Thanks.
So if you put this in your large one, that would take care of it.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And